video. I really have to quit doing this. So I did have an idea, if Hythloday is willing. You know, live conversation doesn't work because that just gets into argument. But I was thinking that, you know, Logic Rolls the Dice had posted a video of, you know, Bertrand Russell and some other guy, and you could see it was scripted in a way. It looked like a scripted argument. But the idea of having a responses that were limited, you know, so 90 seconds, let's say. So you make a 90-second argument, and I'll respond with a 90-second argument, and you'll respond with a 90-second argument. And just, it's going to force staying on the subject. It will force us to say, look, I'm not going to explain why that's not on the subject, but it's not on the subject, and you can make your counter-argument, that kind of thing. Just to try to, then we just tie those together to make the argument. Because this isn't working, obviously. So I've already been over this stuff, and you never paraphrase it correctly. You're quote mining the videos. I mean, this is just, it's not going to work. So anyway, he starts this argument saying there's 3 arguments. No, I mean, I couldn't make it clear in the last video relevant to this conversation with him, where I said there's 2 arguments. You know, there's basically the Benatar asymmetry imposition argument. I mean, sorry, value, absolute value argument, and insufficient cause. And then there's the imposition argument, the lack of consent problem, the ethical argument. So you have the value argument and you have the ethical argument. Both arguments stand alone, but combined they're basically shut all possible doors. You can't, you know, if you could even dent one of them, the other one's still strong. So I'm just saying it's just not a surmountable pile of logic that just overwhelms the irrationality of procreation. Demonstrates it decisively. So anyway, so let's play along.
So this is a video response to Logic Rolls the Dice, his upload of the Hythloday video. Sorry, anti-natalism video. I think it's from Inmendham's channel.
No, I didn't do it. Somebody better than me did. Yeah, it's a nice compilation video. I mean, it has a gray style to it, but I don't know. I don't remember whose video it was. He should have put that in the, you know, shouldn't have reposted the video without a link to the original.
Not sure, but I've had some thoughts on my mind and a way of expressing them, formulating, such that I can clearly pose questions to this philosophical position.
Well, I think I listened to most of this video and I didn't see any of those, so yeah, sorry. I think there's the same miscommunication here. You don't know what a question is supposed to be formed like. It's not supposed to be an accusation I've already answered 7 million times. I mean, really, I don't have any help for you. If you can't tell the value difference between a nail in my eye and me sitting here eating a cupcake going yum yum, there is a universe of value difference between those 2 conscious experiences. That's the bulk of the argument for the source of value. The source of value is in the experience. The experience of nail in the eye is infinitely, really is, from our perception, okay, worse, badder, okay, than eating cupcake. If you don't understand that, I have no help for you. I can't say it any clearer to you. From my personal experience, it's decisive evidence. That's value.
Questions that have cropped up in a manner of speaking, one way or the other.
A matter of distortion of vocabulary and the meaning of words. We might as well just throw out every word that has a value orientation, because people like you will say it's not written on a rock somewhere. All you have is your personal experience, knowing what it's like to have your hand over a candle, and you're just imagining it would be horrible to be boiled in oil. No, I'm not. It's not a debatable subject. Being boiled in oil is decisively a negative thing to have happen to a sensitive feeling organism. Period. It's intrinsically and fundamentally not a good thing. If there's a door that says, boil the sentient organism in oil, you don't open it.
Over the many years of on-off dialogue with anti-natalists, and it centres around recognising, I thought, three central strings to anti-natalism.
No, they're not three central strings. They're two distinctly different arguments. One based on ethics, one based on a understanding of the creation of intrinsic value in the experience of the sentient organism. If there's a sentient in the universe floating in a bubble, the sentient is identifiably different than a sun or a moon or Mars or a rock on Mars. It's identifiably has value richness. Its welfare matters, where the welfare of the rock on Mars does not.
Three separate, what could be called propositions, or conclusions even. And the question is about the logical entailments involved between the three.
So he's saying there's three because he's adding the purpose argument, the idea that there is some necessity outside of our need, the need we create. So our projection is the argument's being made that the only value we have is our projection of value, the fact that we say so. It's not a rational thing. It's not something said by the universe. There is no bleeding wound we can see in the universe and say we are the band-aid for that, therefore we are necessary. So there is no contingent value dependent on our existence. So he's saying that's a separate argument from the argument identifying the fact that there is no true positive value. A true positive value would be something that if it didn't exist, it would be bad. Alright, it would be a negative thing. So a positive would be something like penicillin. Penicillin gets its value from the negative it prevents. It would be bad if it didn't exist. Likewise, so that's where its value comes from. And so to be a true positive, it does have to be negative that it's not here. So it's like for the Martians to be their existence to be valuable, it would have to be perceptibly negative that they don't exist. We would have to somehow say, oh yeah, I get that. And obviously we don't get it, which means we don't lament it, we don't tear, we don't cry. There's no negative because they don't exist that we can discern. And so just like there would be no negative if we didn't exist. So therefore there is not an intrinsic positive separate from the ones we invent in our perception. But again, that just has to do, that's a subsection of the value argument. That's a subsection of the asymmetry argument. The asymmetry argument is basically saying that it's a negative first system. You can only clean up messes you make. There's nothing outside of us that needs cleaning. Therefore, we have to first shit on the floor before we can play around with it and try to clean it up.
Or whether they each stand alone, capable of standing alone as reason for antinatalism.
It's a reason for cynicism regarding the existence of everything in the universe. The fact that there is no apparent necessity to any of it. That it has no intrinsic band-aid on wound kind of function. That is a tragedy of existence. The fact that there's nothing that we can't be a gift to anything. We can't be a help to anything. Again, we have to break a leg before we can mend a leg.
So, but before I get to that, in this video, Inmendham talks about the logical art that non-antinatalists, certainly not myself, but I can imagine plenty of people falling into this fallacious mode of thinking.
And by fallacious mode of thinking, he's saying it is fallacious for you to say it's an absolute fact that a sentient organism having its sentience disrupted by hurtful, painful sensations like those with a nail being driven through the center of your eye, it is fallacious for you to say through personal experience you have gained knowledge of the fact that that experience is fundamentally different than belly rub, and that it is different in an extreme sense, and that it is different in a decidedly preferential versus negative sense, that there is ought written all over it. It is full of oughtness in its very essence. The nail ought not be in the eye. If you have a nail in your eye, I'm sure you'll be quite aware of the idea that it is intrinsic, that that nail should not be in your fucking eye. You will not need to do any complex philosophizing to draw the conclusion that it's an absolute fact that that fucking nail ought not be in your fucking eye.
Inmendham says something like, it exists, so it ought to exist.
Never have I said anything like that. It's a disgusting jumble of words to put in my mouth. Fuck you. I don't know what to say to that. I never said any such thing. I never made any such argument. I said, through personal experience, as a consciousness, I have been edified. I have an advantage over rocks and dirt and trees, and even advantage over computers. I have huge advantage in that I am conscious, and therefore I can talk about what it is like to be conscious in an informed manner, not in a bigoted or biased manner. It doesn't bias me. No, it edifies me.
So you're extracting and imprinting your art just because it exists?
I don't know. See, yes, if negative exists, if a bad experience exists, and we know it's bad, it's negative, it's lesser, it's unproductive, it's destructive to comfort. So comfort is the good state, discomfort is the bad state. If we can agree on that, that's all I need to create this ought.
Now, the question I have relates, where thoughts come, is what is the difference between the statement getting the art from which is fallacious? There is no art in it exists, therefore it ought to exist.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not what I'm saying. So again, you're just lying about what I've said. What I've said is negative exists. It's a reality. The deprivated negative state exists as I've just described it through personal knowledge. I am aware of the fact that there are states, qualitative states of sensation that have a gulf of value difference between them. I've experienced the value difference. I'm saying for my reasoning, the evidence is overwhelming. There's no counter-reasonable argument to suggest that it actually doesn't matter whether I'm eating a cupcake or I have a nail in my eye. There's no alternative theory that makes any sense whatsoever. It's rock solid conclusion. This is value. I'm experiencing it.
There's no way to reasonably get an ought out of that without defining it in though.
Well, again, I just have no help for you. Again, like I said, if you can't say that you know there to be a value difference between a nail in a sentient creature's eye and them having some yummy food item, then again, I have no help for you. I cannot explain sensation and consciousness because apparently you're not aware of what it's like. But I'm telling you, the evidence is decisive. Once you've experienced it, there's just no doubt about it.
And well, obviously, I've got a choice now of these three strings, and I've forgot now which one it is that most readily came to mind, which was best juxtaposed with that that fallacious mode of thought that inmendham alludes to.
Now again, he's called it fallacious as his misparaphrase of my argument. But again, he's implying that it is fallacious to associate horrible conscious sensation with negative happening. That's a fallacious association in his opinion. In my opinion, that's an insane rejection of absolute fact.
I think it was, let's see if it comes correctly, because I might throw it in the bin if it comes wrong. So what's the difference between somebody trying to say it exists, yeah, I know which one it was. What's the difference between somebody saying it exists, therefore it ought to exist?
It exists, therefore it ought to exist. So that's like somebody saying the default nature knows what it's doing, as if it was intelligent, because it was here first, therefore it's right. Yeah, I think we could say that's fallacious.
Then somebody saying there's no reason for it to exist, or no, even better, there's no need for it to exist, therefore it ought not exist.
Nobody's making that argument. If the argument was there's no need for a rock on Mars to exist, therefore it ought not to exist. There's no reason for the rock on Mars to exist, therefore it ought not to exist. Nobody's saying, no one's raising an objection saying because it exists it ought not to exist. It's a rock. There's no value equation. The argument being made is there's a door called suffering, and if you don't have a need to open it, you don't open it. Duh. Well, you ought not open the door called suffering unnecessarily without good cause, because it's a bad door. You can't open bad doors without good cause. That's the ought. The ought isn't the door exists, therefore you shouldn't open it. The ought is the door says suffering. It says bad stuff will happen. That door you ought not open without compensating purpose.
That's wedged in there before the actual set of questions that I had in mind. So, did I go through the three tiers as I see it? The three tiers of anti-NATALISm.
Yeah, well, whatever. You've already lied, preposterously in your setup. But go ahead, let's see.
Natalism is value, is purposelessness of function, of...
Well, again, that's a value argument. Again, you can open the door called bad or suffering if there's something you're going to accomplish. If it would be bad if you didn't open it. If there's some redeeming good that's going to be accomplished by you opening it. So that's its connection to the value argument. The argument being made is there isn't any external value for us to defend the suffering we're creating. So we have to come up with stuff here that's worth it. And the argument being made by Benatar and me and all these other people is, okay, you just can't play the game that way, because the value of things is in the value of prevention, the value of fixing a broken, of getting something back to its neutral state. There is no positive state. There is only the absence of the negative state. That's the dilemma.
Life, etc. And consent, imposition arguments. Now, given three choices, you have...
Let me say again, as I said very clearly in my video, I consider them only two arguments. One's a value argument and one's an argument about ethics.
2 to the exponent 3 to the indice 3 ways of selecting those arguments. You know, it's like binary counting.
You don't have to do any of that. It's shark number 1 and shark number 2. Okay, they're both in the ocean. They're both threatening you as a swimmer, period. Right? So it's this combination crap. I don't need any of this combination crap. You don't have weapon 1 against shark 1, and you don't have nothing against shark 2. And they're both going to eat your ass.
You could say just value results in the conclusion you want, antinatalism.
What the argument being made is there's no rational argument defeating either one of these arguments. There just isn't any rational counter argument beyond something resorting to nature or resorting to some fallacy which you will resort to defend. And your fallacy is, I'm going to pretend value doesn't exist. And you're just pretending. Because I'm damn sure you don't want a nail in your eye. For good reason. For good reason.
I'd say no, really to actually bottom it logically, you could say, really I only need to start with consent issue, and everything else I end up with antinatalism. There's no dependence.
Yeah, well, that's the great advantage we have, is that we have these two great arguments. Now, the value argument, I think, is just viscerally understandable, but it's also the argument that's stuck in this idea of projected value. The idea that somebody will say that Cubs winning the World Series is somehow equal or better than, are worth it if 5 people were killed on the highway going to the game. You know, and burned to death alive. That's their rationale. I'm saying it's irrational. Okay, and that one's based on their projected value, their addictions, and all that stuff. So that one gets a little messy. Okay, not because it's a messy logical argument, but because people don't do logic very well. Alright? But the ethical argument of consent is just slam dunk. If you have any sense of fairness in you, any grasp whatsoever of the concept that you would not want to be have somebody assign risk for you, decide for you what you want to eat and what you want to do and what's good for your health and what's this and da 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 da. I mean, it's almost like the nanny state argument. It's this idea. It's so, that one has the visceral advantaged our side, because it's clearly an obnoxious arrogance. It's clearly saying, I can't tell for sure what's going to happen, but I'm going to push the button with the electrodes under your chair. I mean, anybody can understand there's something wrong with that relationship. When you press the button, it should shock your ass, not their ass.
Or you could say, no, really, I need antenatal, I need consent and value. With those two, premises, I can end up with the most.
Look, either one of these sharks is going to kill you logically. You have no defense against either one. Either one is a decisive kill. It's just the truth. You're not making a rational argument. You're making desperate arguments.
Concrete, unassailable, logical conclusion of antinatalism, or the next binary account would be just purposelessness of life, yeah, and evolution. Yeah, you could say.
So again, who's doing this? Nobody's doing this. No one gives a fuck about any of this crap of mixing the argument in some special sauce or some sort of mixture or whatever. Nobody's doing this. They're arguments. They've been made. What's the counter argument? Your counter argument to the value argument is you can't prove that having a nail in your eye isn't as good as eating a cupcake. That there's no value in that equation whatsoever and no reason to think an ought would be connected to it at all. That's your counter argument. I'm saying that is absolute fucking nonsense. I'm saying any sentient being who's going to argue that they can't tell the difference between a nail in their eye and having a cupcake is insane. That's my diagnosis. They're batshit insane.
From that one insight, I can then generate antinatalism, or you could then binary count and say, no, I need purposelessness of evolution and value, and then I can. So you get the idea that there's 8 counting possibilities or ways of utilizing these arguments. So the question is
nobody's doing that. Again, nobody's wasting their time using pieces of different arguments. The arguments, again, are arguments. They stand on their own. They don't. I don't even understand why. Well, I do understand that this is a way to make a video without making an argument. So you're not really not making an argument here. You're arguing that somehow we have violated the rules of argument by doing something we didn't do. Gee, fair cop? No.
Which ones stand absolutely alone? Which ones need using in conjunction?
Well, again, I have to say that you have to, in the value argument, you have to use the fact of no purpose in conjunction. It's fundamental to the conclusion. You can't draw the conclusion until you're sure. If I had a swimming pool and it didn't have any sharks in it, all right, but it was right next to the ocean, or the ocean fed right into it, well, I couldn't say it's safe until I made sure there was no sharks in the ocean too, right? The ocean accessible to the pool. So you can't make the argument that there's no value, that life has no value, until you make the declaration, yes, it doesn't heal a wound in the universe. It doesn't serve a purpose outside of human desire. It has no need to exist beyond projected need in human psychologies. There's no actual serviceable help it does. It creates problems and solves half of them. I've used this metaphor, oh, fucking hundreds of times now. Alright? It's like spilling milk, cleaning up half of it, and calling yourself a hero. Now, do you think that's how it works? That you can circularly create a problem, fix some of it, alright? You can have a fireman that sets fires, okay, and then puts some of them out. And everybody's, yay, what a hero. No, he sets the fires. There's no fire without him. Could he possibly have value? Would that be a valuable fireman to hire? Should towns hire firemen who set fire? We actually had some. Just to make themselves important, they set a few fires. It's amazing when you think about it, right? But anyway, would it be rational? Should a town ought to hire firemen who set fires and only put half of them out? It's a rhetorical question.
I'm going to go through that video very briefly, just to make my point. I think this is, you know, I don't. Inmendham thinks, and maybe I do, but it's not. The point is, it's not intentional. Mischaracterize arguments.
Liar. So again, you know, accusation with no evidence. Excellent, fantastic, super. Fuck you.
But I'll go through some clips to illustrate the strings of thought that I see.
Yeah, whatever. You'll quote mine and butcher. Fine.
That I think I've identified and wish to raise these questions to. Okay. Right. So just some clips from the beginning. What's this one? I think this is regarding purposelessness, perhaps.
They do it, and their children do it, and their children, and so on, and so on, and so on. Right? But did you ever ask yourself why we do it? Why?
So the question of why we do it, I see as is the purposelessness. There's no.
Look, the obviously Metamorph is getting to the point that people, he just said it, right? So you might not have heard what he said, but he said it's just an and so on thing. People just keep doing it because everybody else is doing it. That there is no reasoning behind the process. It's happening as a matter of psychology. It's happening as a matter of a understanding of a necessary mandate, something that needs to take place for the health and welfare of the universe. It's not being done for that purpose. No purpose is being identified. People are only reacting because everybody else has a nuclear-powered TV that they have to have one too.
Reason to do it. This sentiment is expressed by most anti-natalists.
It serves no purpose outside of human projected desire. Yes. Projected value. Not intrinsic, not an identification of intrinsic value. Recognize this terminology. The identification of an intrinsic value and a projected value. Those are the two things that are made distinctively different. Those are identified in the asymmetry argument. There is a distinction made between real value, that is, if it doesn't exist, it's negative. There's a negative. It's the void is obvious when the good is missing. That's an intrinsic good. There aren't any of those, except ones that are healing wounds. And the only way you can have wounds is to open the door called suffering. And there's no reason to do it.
Consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, because it's just an island planet, essentially. There are a bunch of evolving organisms on an island. They will start.
So this is Inmendham's insight to the purposelessness, I think, of and the.
It really isn't. This is an argument to the value argument. That it is. This is an argument from its creator, the machinery that made it. And how likely is that machinery? How are these ingredients, consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, and addiction, going to create something called a necessary good? Those ingredients aren't likely to do that.
You know, the uncontrollable mechanistic nature of evolution, and because it's mechanistic, it has no purpose.
No, it has no knowledge. I have knowledge as a sentient. Nature does not have knowledge. Nature is a process. Nature is stupid. It's crude. It's simple. It's consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, addiction, to replicate a DNA molecule, to create lots and lots of victims to manifest your whatever one survives, the million-man war. It's incredible carnage merely to create a new model that is in no intrinsic way better than the old model, except it survived the new war.
It has no decision making about what's worthy. It just grinds out. So again, I think this is a similar point to the purposelessness.
It's an argument to the value, and obviously, again, if you're going to say something doesn't have value, part of your argument's going to be its origin. Part of your argument's going to be its creation, of course. So you have the to unfully contextualize value, I have to first describe that there's no external value, there's no wound we heal in the universe, and then I describe the origin of this mechanism and what is its performance, and what is there some element in the performance that is likely to create this positive gift value to the universe? No, there isn't.
Strand.
Perception of value. Nothing has value in and of itself. It's a perception of it, a desire for it, that makes it valuable. The only thing that has value is the conscious welfare. The welfare of the state of the consciousness at any given moment has value.
So I'd agree that using the word value, well, the problem is to me this seems to be the sole root definition that leads to that best logically leads to antinatalism if you accept the definition. And it seems that I'm getting a concept thrust upon me without argument for that particular value concept.
Right, okay, so again, he's saying there's no argument for the value concept, that it matters whether, if I had a mouse sitting on my desk here, that there would be a value difference in me giving the mouse a little piece of cheese or me hammering a nail into the mouse's eye. He's saying that argument hasn't been made, that it somehow doesn't have any bite to it. That's not sufficient for a consciousness to understand and say, yeah, I get that. I get that that would be a value difference. I mean, again, like I said, if I was talking to a brick wall, I could understand, a brick wall that had vocabulary, but never felt anything, ever. Never had a feeling. Well, I could understand the brick wall saying, well, what's the difference? You can stick a nail in my eye and it's not going to matter, because I don't feel anything. What's the big deal, this feeling thing? What are you talking about, you silly people? Okay, I can understand. Now I got a real problem. How am I going to explain to a brick wall the difference between yummy cheese and nail in eye? But you're not a brick wall, fuckhead. So I really shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to go any further than to say this is the metaphor, because there is no other metaphor. I can't compare sensation to anything else in the universe. There's no other thing in the universe anything like sensation. If you could point to me something that's like it, then I'll use it as a metaphor. But there's nothing else in the universe like conscious sensation. So you either understand it, or I'm not going to be able to explain it to you. You have to know what a feeling is to know the difference between the really bad ones and the good ones. I can't explain it any better. I can't. What can I say? You can't acknowledge that there's a value difference between a nail in something's eye and it eating a piece of cheese. Well, I can't help you then. How many times can I say that? I have no help for you. There's no other analogy for that circumstance. There's no other analogy or metaphor or thing you can compare it to. I can only compare sentient things to sentient things. There's nothing else like sentience. Fuck.
In the past, inmendham seems to have, when we reach this point, to ask for why is the perception value thrown in the bin, and why must I accept this statement that only the sentience has value and is value?
I didn't say the sentience is value. Yes, I said it produces value by having a qualitative state of being. It's in a qualitative state of being. Through every moment of my conscious existence, I go through states of qualitative feeling. And that has value. That generates value. If I was the only thing in the universe, I would be the only thing that mattered. If there was only one consciousness in the universe, that consciousness would have the entirety of all relevant meaning in the universe would be that thing. Everything else would derive its value based on how it impacted that thing. And the idea of projected value being in the bin is the fact that these projections of value are arbitrary and erroneous. They have nothing to do with actual merit. Baseball, for example, or any other addiction, these things in and of themselves have no value. We entirely create the value by sensually reacting through psychology. Not through reason, but through psychology. Our psychology declares a value. When we know that reasoning must declare the value. Reasoning must discover the truth. So my bigotry could say that black man is guilty because he's black. So a bigotry could say that. That would be a projection of the truth. But the evidence should be the thing that convicts the man. Correct? That's the argument here. You can't make value declarations from psychology. You have to make value declarations from reasoning.
The answer, the best that I could see or recall that was given, was that intelligence sees it, and I don't find that a very fulfilling answer. I think.
Well, I can't help you then. If you don't recognize the fact that intelligence is the only way to understand any ethics, that intelligence is the only way to see any of the ideas like fairness, these concepts can't have meaning to something without knowledge. You have to have knowledge of context to be able to understand these concepts. But these concepts exist. Efficiency of a car. You need to understand something about fuel economy, fuel, its cost of its creation. You need to understand pollution and gases, exhaust gases. You need to understand the inefficiency of the heat. You need to understand the expense of creating the vehicle and the rubber and the tires and this and that. That's how you need to have some knowledge before you can judge its efficiency. You can't judge the sufficiency of life on Earth if you don't have intelligence to be able to do it.
By definition, if intelligence sees it, intelligence has to be able to make a truth statement about it, with which I can test and say, yes.
Exactly. We've made the truth statement, okay? The value is in the qualitative state of the sentient organism. It's intrinsic. It's a qualitative state. It creates value just by happening. So when the conscious state exists, it creates value by just happening, and it comes in these decidedly cavernously different value conditions of horrible, awful, terrible, benign, comforting, relaxing.
That is true. Intelligence sees it is not a truth statement that can...
It's an argument. Yeah, that's right. It's an argument defending the truth statement that intelligence is the way you acquire awareness of complex things. You can't understand a complex thing without intelligence. That's the subtext of intelligence sees it.
Be tested. So I don't feel I have to accept that definition.
So you think ignorance can know the truth? Is that your reasonable alternative theory? No.
Of value.
What is the point of perpetuating the people not equal faith?
Oh, that was just incomprehensible. So I don't remember exactly what he said, but it's probably something to do with need, I think.
So again, allusions to there's no need for it to exist. It's angst with the purposelessness of life.
Right. No rationally discernible, no conception of need, description of need that has any intellectual integrity. The only need it can serve is a projected value, some psychological need. It can't serve some rationally articulatable need.
One that I share, actually, but I don't deny others the right to assign purposes to their own life.
Well, then you might as well just say you think wrong things. I, on the other hand, again, my confidence is absolute. I can't imagine being more certain. So I don't have any such lack of confidence in the fact that, no, I have not heard a rational counter-argument. There has been articulated no rational alternative argument. I have no reason to doubt. I have no reason to doubt. I'm as certain of this fact as I am certain there's no Jehovah.
Is that what you mean is being deprived? Our need serves no need. It doesn't need to exist.
So there was where I got the question. Hang on a minute. Gary says it exists, therefore it ought to exist. That's ridiculous.
It exists, therefore it ought to exist. Again, I don't even know where you got that from. I don't know what the fuck that means. I've never said that. It's just an absolute fucking slanderous lie. I mean, what do you want me to do? You don't think you should? I mean, prove I've ever said that. Show me where I've ever said those words in that inarticulate, sloppy manner. I've never said anything like that. That is preposterous bullshit.
So I rebut the question and say there's no need for it to exist, therefore it ought not to exist. It's there.
Again, that's not the argument. Nobody's arguing. If this was a benign rock on Mars, nobody would argue there's an ought. Again, the door has suffering written on it. That's where the need becomes relevant. There's no need to open the door called suffering. That's the argument. There's no redeeming hope of accomplishment to compensate for the suffering that's behind the door called suffering.
Both equally absurd propositions logically.
Yeah, well, whatever. Straw man, liar, scumbag. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's such an obvious straw man. It's such an obvious argument we're not making. We're not saying benign rocks on Mars ought not to exist. That's not the argument. Fuck head.
The entailments are fallacious in those conclusions from those statements, that there is an ought in those statements.
Yeah, there's not an ought in the lack of need. No one's contending the lack of need for life to exist on Earth has anything to do with the ought, beyond the fact that it eliminates redeeming, compensating value good. There's no value good in the external universe through which we can purchase the bad on this planet. There's no... It's like gambling in Las Vegas. There's no ought if there's nothing at risk. But if it's money at risk, which represents welfare and happiness and joy and peace and comfort, then there's an ought.
Imposing life that isn't in position. You don't ask the baby beforehand, do you want to be brought up in this world under these circumstances?
So there's the third strand, the imposition argument, where, you know, again, I remind you that the question is, the overall question for this video is, what's the logical dependencies between these three strings?
There is no logical dependency.
You know,
there's no logical dependency between the two arguments, the value argument and the consent argument. They're separate arguments. One's an ethically based argument. One's a value-based argument. One, you know, they're both philosophical, but I guess I would argue that the value argument is one more real to the circumstance of properties and categories, a more rudimentary kind of philosophy, where the ethical argument is one dependent on some acceptance of some idea of fairness and what's the better word, deserve, having something to do with it and all that kind of stuff. You'd have to understand the inequity of slavery to understand the inequity of impositional procreation.
I think from the value assignment you get perhaps Bennett's argument, but I think it's mathematically flawed, but you certainly get negative.
Yeah, well, you can think it, but you haven't made the argument demonstrating it, so I'll just point that out.
Utilitarianism, very possible, and therefore antinatalism, and perhaps arguably generally utilitarianism, and then therefore antinatalism. So, but the question is does the consent stand alone? Something inmendham says, which is the thought's been growing on my mind, that when he says the standards, he admits that we can't actually get consent, and he says therefore the standard is really high that we must meet when we can't get consent. And I share this moral intuition.
Yeah, well, again, you're again saying something. I share this moral intuition. Again, I find that obnoxious for you to say. That's like saying I share this theological belief. I find it obnoxious. Okay, I don't do moral intuition. I do logic and reasoning, and it's just a consequence of reasoning that if you're going to do something that affects someone else, your standard of perfection goes higher. You may risk your own ass. You cannot risk somebody else's. Drawing straws for yourself because you want to play draw straw game, fine. Draw straws for somebody else, not so fine.
But I'd ask inmendham quite simply, why? Why is the standard so high? And moreover, how do we decide?
Okay, so why is the standard higher when you're conducting an activity for which your welfare isn't on the skillet? And so the argument would just again be just kind of rudimentarily visceral. First, you would certainly know that when it's happening to you. If somebody puts you in a frying pan, you say, what am I doing in the frying pan? Well, somebody rolled dice for you and that's what you got. You would intrinsically know something's wrong here. This isn't the way. This isn't deserve. I didn't assign any risk. I didn't agree to anything. Why am I being subjected to this risk? I didn't want the candy that what they got for it. I didn't gain any profit from this deal. So I guess the idea that, and so but the basic logic again is understanding something like raw economics. If you don't think there's any such thing as an economic theory that increases productivity or enhances distribution, or that some sort of thing like equitable distribution, then you really can't understand, okay, the fact that deserve should have something to do with it. And it's clearly deserve has nothing to do with it if you're allowed to risk somebody else's welfare and not be subjected to the punishment and the penalty of the risk. That's intrinsically unfair.
Exactly how high it is. What is the principle of the height of this?
Deserve should have something to do with it. That's the principle. That any risk should be a consensual contract. That there should not be risk imposed without somebody saying, yeah, I'm in. That's what they should say before you cut their nuts off because they lost them in a poker game that they never were in. You know, I don't know how, I mean, I can come up with a ton of metaphors, but I mean, you could sort of understand that, right? I mean, if the cops showed up with a knife and cut your nuts off and said, well, you lost them at a poker game last night, and you weren't even at the poker game, you'd say, this is fucked up.
I think some people say that, or at times I've thought has been said by inmendham or by the anti-natalist community, that no risk can be borne, not about heights of standards, but if there's any risk at all and you've not got opportunity to consent, then you cannot subject them to that risk.
Yeah, unless you have some kind of really, really, really amazing possibility. So I mean, like, if you could argue that, yeah, you're gonna save 1 million people from getting cancer, then you could make an argument that it's okay for you to start imposing on one person somewhere. But that's not the argument you're making. So again, I'm not setting the bar impossibly high, but I'm just going to say to you that just like the idea of rationally understanding that the World Series isn't worth the traffic deaths created to get to it, that nothing happens in the World Series that's spectacular enough to justify killing kids for it, that's a rational argument. And this, you know, these psychological arguments just don't mean anything in the face of that. I mean, I'd like to say that you could just recklessly go ahead and fuck with other people, but if you can't get the idea that it is wrong to give somebody a gift that has smallpox on it, I can't explain that to you either. I mean, if you're going to give somebody something, you ought to be damn sure it's a fucking gift.
I think that's a very untenable position.
Well, I think the alternative position is ludicrous. So you're saying it's okay to give shoddy, shitty gifts. Gifts that give people smallpox. Gifts that give people ALS. Gifts that kill people when they're 6 years old. Gifts of dying driving to the Super Bowl. You think it's okay to give people this shit as gifts. I say that's rude and obnoxious. Fuck you. I hope somebody gives you a rotten gift that you deserve. I hope you get what you deserve, which is apparently the shitty gift of a long and horrible death.
I.e. infinite height. Yeah, the requirement is infinite height.
Well, again, it's not infinite, but as a practical matter, if we were in a clean slate world, there was nothing on the blackboard, well, then the obligation would be infinite. Clearly, we live in a world where there's so much harm taking place that you could probably justify dumping a lot of burden on individual people to save very many people. So, yeah, there's lots of collateral damage on this dirty planet that would be acceptable. But in a pure philosophical argument with nothing on the board, there's just no way you can justify saying, I'm going to play open the suffering door game, and it's not your suffering. That couldn't be rationally defended. That would be a bad act.
And I think I could easily assail that position. But the question is what underlying principles?
Yeah, I think I could. When you grow wings and fly, oink, oink.
Help me to decide the height of this requirement. Would it be a utilitarian principle?
Like I said, if you're going to have the principled argument, there's no, yes, the height is infinite. If the principal argument, again, there's a door called suffering. The suffering going to happen to somebody else. I can't imagine what good cause I could have to open that fucking door on a clean slate universe where there's no cancer to cure, there's nobody, no kittens in a tree to rescue, there's absolutely nothing to fix. There's not a single thing crying or upset in the entire fucking universe. Alright? I can't really make a rational argument saying I'm going to impose suffering to impose suffering. Because there was nothing else to do. But yes, on this planet there's lots of suffering that already fucking exists because you assholes are just that, assholes. And so, yeah, on this planet, conditionally, yeah, it's probably ethically okay to run over a hell of a lot of people to fix hella big problems. Fucking idiot.
So, I know inmendham said a lot. I've tried to include some people, some different voices to establish my central proposition here, that there's three strings, and I'll finish with this anti-bullshit one, isn't it?
We should look at the issue of whether or not those who have the capacity to recognize what it's doing. We should look at the end result of its fucking doing, of its cycle, and the impact it has on real creatures.
Yeah, recognize that the door suffering, it doesn't mean, oh well, it's a door called suffering. No, it's a door called suffering that has huge suffering in it. Okay, this is, you can't even compile the amount of horror that has been taking place for this thing we call existence. So not to acknowledge the incredible high price that has been paid for what we are doing, and what we are doing is just disgusting for that price. It's just, it's we're barely doing something better than shitting in our pants. I mean, that might even be a better show than the show we're putting on.
So that utilitarian impact is alluding, I guess, to the root definition of the value of sentience that is started as a defining point, which I don't actually see argument or reason to accept. I've never seen an actual argument.
Okay, again, so what can I say? How can I make an actual argument outside of a reference to sentient experience? What other thing in the universe is like sentience? What other external thing can I compare it to? There is nothing else to compare it to. I have to use the actual feeling sensation as an example because it's the only way, it's the only thing that I can compare it to. And if you don't understand that, again, which I say is just an overt lie, then I have no help for you. If you're going to say that you can't rationally cognize the fact that you have experienced positive and negative sensations, then I have nothing to say to you except go talk to a wall or a brick or your other family members. Because you're not communicating with somebody who does have enlightenment as consciousness. I'm an enlightened consciousness. You apparently are not.
And to say this, why this logically is the starting point. So there we have it. Questions for antinatalisms. I expect inmendham will probably make a reply, but it'd be good to start internal dialogue and see whether there's agreement about this and how well the antinatalists understand their positions.
Yeah, whatever. It would be nice, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you know, some of the antinatalists are douchebags. I mean, logic rolls the dice. Another stupid comment. I see you as a reasonable person. How is this reasonable? He's arguing that you need to make some sort of argument defending sentience without referencing sentience. How do you do that? The is-ought problem is a genuine concern to me. So again, I guess this is one of these Asperger things. Maybe you guys really just don't feel. So you really can't tell the difference between a nail in your eye and eating a cupcake. You can't figure that out. I'm sorry for you. Although I think that Kant, you know, Kant is an asshole. Guess what? Newsflash. Although I think, like Kant, that it can be bridged by the will of subjects, which I don't know what that means, who deem something should be the case as a branch of other Kantian imperatives thrown in there too. Well, fuck this stupid Kantian. Intentions have nothing to do with it, okay? It's the end results. You either do or you do not do. I think all sentients can agree that feeling bad is bad, at least intrinsically. Well, apparently he doesn't agree with that. So why are you saying something like that? Why are you saying he's reasonable, making a declarative statement that he's overtly rejected? That's not logical. I understand enduring pain for the greater purpose, but I shall argue it reduces to feeling good about oneself at the end of the day. Yes, you're getting gratification of some other deprivation.